In just 40 years, China went from being one of the poorest countries on Earth to a global superpower. It's truly one of the most incredible transformations in all of human history, and today, we're going to break down exactly how it happened.
I mean, really think about that question. It's the defining economic story of our lifetime. Just one generation ago, China was an impoverished, isolated nation. Today, it's an economic titan that is literally shaping our world. So the big question is, how on earth did they pull it off?
Well, let's start with the sheer scale of this change, because the numbers are just mind-boggling. Back in 1978, China accounted for a tiny 2% of the world's entire economic output. Today, it's over 18%. That's not just growth, that's a complete reordering of the global economy.
And to really get your head around this, you have to understand where they started from. Just over 40 years ago, an astonishing 9 out of every 10 people in China lived in extreme poverty. Widespread starvation wasn't ancient history, it was a recent memory. The country was, to put it mildly, struggling.
Now look at this. Today, that poverty rate is less than 1%. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people lifted out of poverty in a single generation. It's a staggering achievement, no matter how you look at it. But to understand this miracle, you first have to understand the misery that came right before it.
So let's dive into Section 1, from humiliation to famine. Because to really understand China's meteoric rise, we first have to look at the century of hardship that set the stage for everything.
For more than 100 years, starting in the mid-1800s, China was basically carved up by foreign powers and completely torn apart by internal conflict. This period, which the Chinese called the Century of Humiliation, saw devastating wars, forced treaties, and millions upon millions of deaths, all culminating in a brutal civil war.
And out of all that chaos, a new leader emerged. On October 1, 1949, Mao Zedong and his Communist Party declared victory, promising the people they would finally restore China's strength and its sovereignty.
Now, Mao's first major plan was called the Great Leap Forward. And the goal was, well, incredibly audacious, to transform China from a rural farming society into an industrial powerhouse, and to do it seemingly overnight. He forced farmers onto massive collective farms and ordered people to build small steel furnaces in their own backyards. The results, they were absolutely catastrophic. The steel from those backyard furnaces was totally worthless. With the government seizing all the crops, farmers had zero reason to work hard, and food production just plummeted. And then there were these truly disastrous policies, like a campaign to kill all the sparrows, which completely destroyed the ecological balance and led to a massive surge in crop-eating insects. All of this led directly to one of the deadliest famines in human history. The human cost of this top-down, ideologically driven experiment was just staggering, with estimates of up to 40 million people dead.
Now, facing criticism for the famine, what did Mao do? He launched yet another campaign, the Cultural Revolution. It was basically a violent purge of anyone he considered an enemy of his ideology. Schools were shut down, priceless history was destroyed, and the country plunged into a decade of chaos and fear.
So by the time Mao died in 1976, China was on its knees. But his death cleared the way for a new leader, a man who had actually been purged by Mao, not once but twice. His name was Deng Xiaoping, and he was about to change everything.
This slide really shows you the fundamental shift in thinking that turned it all around. You see, where Mao saw ideological purity, Deng saw pragmatism. He had this famous saying, "It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice." For him, results were what mattered, not the dogma.
And this quote, it just brilliantly illustrates his method. Instead of another giant, risky leap like Mao's, Deng argued for a slow, careful, experimental approach. Take a step, see if the stone holds, then take the next one. He wanted to reform the system, not blow it up all over again.
Okay, Section 2, China's Economic Blueprint. So how did Deng's philosophy actually translate into action? Let's get into the nitty-gritty, the actual blueprint for China's economic rise.
Deng's strategy was basically a 4-part plan. Pretty simple, right? 1. Free the farmers to give them incentives. 2. Empower factories to actually produce things. 3. Invest in people through education. And finally, number 4, open the doors to the world. Let's walk through how each of these steps worked.
So first, and this was absolutely crucial, he freed the farmers.
Now, the state still technically owned the land, but families could lease it for the long term, and here's the key. They could sell anything they grew beyond the government's quota on the open market for a profit. For the first time in decades, there was a real incentive to produce more. And boy, did they produce. Grain production doubled in just a few years.
At the same time, Deng knew that all the factories and farms in the world were useless without a skilled workforce. So in 1986, the government made a massive investment in its own people, mandating 9 years of free education for every single child. This created the human capital that would power the economic boom that was about to come.
The final piece of the puzzle was opening China's doors to the world, but doing it very, very carefully. Deng created what he called special economic zones. You can think of them like controlled economic laboratories. They were in coastal areas where foreign companies could come in and invest, but with fewer restrictions. It was a brilliant way to attract money and technology without destabilizing the whole country.
And the absolute prime example of this strategy was a tiny, sleepy fishing village right across the border from Hong Kong. It was called Shenzhen, and it was chosen to be China's very first special economic zone.
Just look at that number. In just 40 years, Shenzhen exploded from that sleepy village into a global tech hub with an economy worth over $420 billion. This wasn't just success, it was spectacular, undeniable proof that Deng's experimental model worked.
But, and this is a huge but, this incredible story of progress has a really complicated and often very dark side. You see, the Chinese Communist Party opened up the economy, but it never, ever let go of its absolute grip on political power. This progress came at a steep, steep price. The Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989 was a brutal signal to the world that political reform was completely off the table. At the same time, this breakneck industrialization created a massive environmental crisis. And, of course, to this day, the state maintains its iron grip, suppressing dissent and basic human rights. And all of this leads to the critical question for China's future. The pragmatism of Deng seems to have been replaced by a new era of centralized control. So the great test of the 21st century is this: can China's remarkable economic engine keep thriving without the very freedoms that have historically fueled the kind of innovation you need to lead the world? That's a question only time will answer.